the underworld were actually trying to run the city.
Melbourne Gangland War. How many people were killed?
Pretty much everyone either ended up dead or locked up.
What was your involvement in that investigation?
Well, I was there at the start.
What was the pressure like then?
It was like, who's next?
Today, I had a conversation with former Victorian homicide detective Andrew Stamper, who led some of the biggest investigations in the country, including Melbourne's deadly Gangland War. Andrew was one of the lead investigators of Strikeforce Piranha, a police task force that looked into notorious underworld killings and drug syndicates involving infamous figures like Carl Williams. During that time, Andrew put away 2 murderers for killing crime figure Lewis Kane. He also took us inside the 2017 Lone Wolf Flinders Street attack, where a car was deliberately driven into busy Christmas crowds, injuring 19 innocent people, and one of those people died. Having spent more than 40 years with the police, Andrew, to me, is the real deal as far as detectives go, and he's someone I would have liked to have worked with. Have a listen. I think you're going to enjoy this as much as I did. Andrew Stamper, thank you for coming on I Catch Killers.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's good talking to a former cop, and it's really, this is the genesis of what this whole podcast started about. I was speaking to people that had worked homicide cases, so it's good to get back to our roots, so to speak.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
You spent 40 years in the police. What's your takeaway from it? We're looking back now, you've probably been out long enough to have time to reflect on it.
My takeaway is it was a privilege.
Yeah.
I think someone one of our former chief commissioners said you've got a front seat to the best show on earth, and I honestly feel that at sometimes. And some of the roles I was able to do, I feel immense privilege, and also a great deal of pride as well when I think about the people that I've worked with over the years, and and knowing how committed they've been to keeping the community safe too. So yeah, that's my overwhelming thoughts.
I like sitting down speaking to people that have spent as long as you have in the police at the sharp end of policing. You're always in there with your sleeves rolled up doing the work, that you come away from that. And I think you mentioned the word privilege, and I look back at my career, and it is a privilege, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, look, probably the same as you. You cop a few bruises over the journey, and I've certainly got that, and I know you do too.
Yeah.
But as I say, holistically, it's been a pleasure and privilege.
Mm. The other thing you said, it's like, or you attributed to someone else's comment, that a front row seat into some of the most interesting things you could possibly find yourself at. I often felt that in cases, if they were high profile cases, you would think, everyone's interested what's behind that police tape, what's going on, what are the police doing, and here you are in the thick of it.
Yeah, it's life in the goldfish bowl, isn't it? And certainly there's been a number of cases over my career where you really feel that you're in the goldfish bowl, and a lot of cases where you're really working hard to stay one step ahead of the media, who are running their own investigations as well. And that was a lesson that I learned a number of years ago too. And I hope that's one of the things that enabled me later in my career to actually work more collaboratively with the media on a lot of those high impact cases.
Yeah, well, with the high profile comes a different type of pressure, doesn't it? When you're heading up an investigation, or you're involved in an investigation. But I've followed your career. There's always interest when I was in the cops, what's happening down in Melbourne, and I saw different things. But in the times I saw you in the media, you always seemed to have a purpose to what you were saying.
Well, I think there has to be. I think you don't just do it for the sake of it. And for me, engaging with the media, that was either the purpose was it was either in community information or reassurance, or trying to gain some strategic benefit for the investigation. And I think that was always a challenge early days in an investigation, certainly sitting in the position that I did in later years, in a leadership position there, to think how we could leverage that
Yeah.
most effectively.
Yeah, I see it. I see it as a tool that in the kit that you have to solve a crime, you can certainly use the media. Your policing career, a little bit different from most Australian cops, because you started your policing career in the UK. Tell us about that.
Yeah, 5 years as a bobby in just to the west of London, in an area called Wiltshire there, and that was fantastic. I grew up in the UK, albeit I'm always at pains to explain that I am Australian, particularly at times such as now when the cricket's on. But I did 5 years over there, and that was very different. Starting off in the mid-'80s, where you were still on foot patrol. You started off on foot patrol, and as a 19-year-old, walking into people's homes. I'd come from a small village in the north of England, and suddenly I'm talking to people who were twice as old as me and had life experience, and trying to tell them how to live their lives. And a lot of early lessons there. One of my old sergeants, who was a pretty fearsome character, he used to give you these old adages, like, to be a good cop, you've got to have more faces than town hall clock. And that's one thing that's stuck with me, that you really have to adapt your approach or your communication style to the person you're dealing with. And that was something that really, really stuck with me all of my career, that, you've got to communicate with people on their level, and that could be, talking to, someone who's a multimillionaire and to someone who's living on the street. But, another thing that same sergeant told me is that, that you treat everyone equally, you treat everyone with respect, and you start off from a position of respect, notwithstanding where they come from or what their status is in life. You treat everyone the same, and those two things I think have stayed with me from those early days in policing.
It's good advice, isn't it? And it's very much your formative years, those early times in policing, and you're fortunate enough if you get a good mentor pointing you in the right direction. I think that can shape your whole career, the experience you get very early in policing.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I can still quote all of those little nuggets of gold that that particular sergeant used to drill into all of us probationers as we were at the time.
Yeah, life as a bobby, and a lot of our perception of what goes on in the UK is from the show The Bill. That was a big one. That was very much people watching.
Come back a while now.
The life of cops, walking the beat, not having a weapon, and you would quite often, it was very much community-based policing. That was my observation of it. One out without a firearm. What was the different nature of policing that we don't follow that path in Australia? What was it about the UK policing that allowed that type of policing?
I think there was a cultural thing. I think that society in the UK at that time, and I stress at that time because I think it's changed now.
Yeah.
There was guns were far less common, and certainly the crooks, for want of a better term, probably were less armed than they were here, and there's a cultural piece to that somewhere, but it was just always an acceptance that the British police weren't armed. And there seemed to be this kind of unwritten code, I suppose, between the crooks and the cops in the UK, and I'm talking back in the 80s. Yeah. And as I say, things have changed a lot now. But you certainly learnt to think on your feet a lot more, and particularly as I was, as a 19-year-old, as I say, just green, just come out of training school, and my first role was as a community bobby, so walking around what we would call like a housing commission estate, or a Ministry of Housing kind of estate, and that was 3 shifts, 24 hours, and sometimes on night shift, 3 o'clock in the morning, you're walking around in the middle of winter by yourself. Occasionally some of the guys that were driving the cars would come and pick you up just to defrost you, just get you in the car and just turn the heater on and just pump some life back into you, and then chuck you up, because the sergeant would be coming around, and the expectation was that you'd be on your patch, but overwhelmingly, I think it was just learning to think on your feet and talk your way through situations a lot more, and that's a very important tool here, as you know.
Yeah.
Very often I get the privilege of speaking to young cops, and one of the things I do tell them is learn to talk to people. Just have conversations with people, because in the world the way it is now, and particularly with policing, where it's just almost become a response type profession, just take the time to talk to people. It's one of the greatest arts that coppers have.
Well, that's a good advice to pass on, because it's amazing what you get when you do actually sit down and talk to people. And non-judgmental, I think, is very important too. That type of advice, and it is. This is something that kept my interest in policing too. You do get to speak to a whole range of people. Like I was in the course of my duties speaking to world leaders and people that were living on the streets and fly-blown. It was. But that communication is crucial. And I look at all the cops that I respect, they had that ability to communicate at different levels. And often it breaks down that barrier.
Yep, absolutely. And, and that's something I've always prided myself in just, treating everyone with respect. Kind of held me in good stead, I think, for the 40 years that I was doing it.
Okay, before we take you out of the UK policing and bring you crashing into Victorian police, in some of the information just preparing for the podcast, I see that at one point in time, part of your duties was protecting a UK cabinet minister, high on the IRA hit list. What was the backstory there? That seems like an interesting role to be involved in.
Just before I came over back to Australia, as it was, I did 12 months in the VIP protection team for a fellow who was at the time the British Minister for Northern Ireland, and a lot of people forget about how serious the Northern Ireland issue was. And in the mid '80s or mid to late '80s in the UK, it was really at its highest, where we were talking Margaret Thatcher as the Prime Minister, and there was absolutely no love lost whatsoever between the Irish Republicans and the British government. So that was a really interesting time, because I was kind of thrust into this really high security environment. And we talk about going from a non-armed situation, and I then went into a situation where I was heavily armed, and talking about driving around country lanes in Range Rovers with some serious weaponry as a 22, 23-year-old. So I'd done all the firearms training over there, and the threat from the IRA was very real. They actually did. There was, I think, 3 people it was who were initially convicted of conspiracy to murder, and this was all at the time that I was looking after him. And then, ironically, they were acquitted due to comments made by the subject that we were protecting, who made comments in the media which were deemed to be highly prejudicial, and the cases, they were acquitted on appeal. So that was quite ironic, really, that the person that we were trying to protect screwed it up ultimately. But they were really serious about it, and they were highly trained, highly effective soldiers. They weren't some ragtag army of like some street gang. They were highly effective soldiers, and they did their work. They did their reconnaissance, and then the reconnaissance team would pass it onto a hit team, and so it was interesting times. Just being in that environment, and it was actually good to come to Australia and kind of get out of that where things were
I would
a little bit
imagine
more relaxed.
would be very tense. I've done close personal protection in situations like that, but not with that threat of the IRA. And as you describe them, they're not they're not part timers. They're professional, and if they've got a target, they're going to go after them tactically. You would have had to be on your toes. So is that why you have I dug deep enough to work out why you've come to Australia? You thought, let's get out of there?
No, look, I was born here. My parents are English. They came over here, went back, so I was born here, and it just always been my ambition to come back. Growing up, and so that was really a way to I took on that role, knowing that I was coming here in 12 months' time, and so that was really nothing to do with I wasn't escaping that or anything like that. But it was hairy times as well. But again, as you learn something through all of these roles.
Yeah.
And you take that with you during your career, and so that concept of personal and operational security has always been paramount as well.
I think, having done tactical policing myself, I think it boded very well for working in criminal investigation when you mightn't be doing the tactical stuff yourself at that stage, but you had the communication, you understand their capabilities and different things. So it's all about getting the experience. Did you come over to Australia with the intent to join the police?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd actually come here on holiday, and I did all the recruiting interviews while I was here on holiday. And they, at that time, here in Victoria in 1989, it would have been that a lot of people they just changed the superannuation scheme. And so a lot of the old timers left under the old scheme, and so there was a massive recruiting drive. And I didn't know that, but they were pushing people through, very quickly. And unlike today, there was a vast pool of applicants who wanted to do it, which is a different story these days. But so I came here, did all the testing and interviews, and they said, come back in 6 months and you can go straight in. So I was pretty much back within 6 months.
Okay. Did you get any the credit or allowances for your experience, or you had to start fresh and in the academy, learn how to march
No.
Okay.
And I've used this analogy before, but. Back at the academy in those days, they still did a thing here which was called fatigues.
Yeah.
So if you lived in the academy, I don't know what it was like at Goulburn back in your day, but if you lived in the academy, you had to have a job, and you got allocated a role. So it might be picking litter up, it might be washing dishes after dinner, and my role was sweeping the roundabout at the front of the police academy. So I'd gone from looking after the British Minister for Northern Ireland to sweeping the roundabout at the front of the police academy in very quick time. But again, out of that, I remember those times, and they're humbling moments where you kind of think, well, just put your head down, just do what you got to do. Just keep pushing forward, and you learn a lot from those moments too. That you could actually throw your arms up in the air and say I'm too good for this or whatever, but I think you just push through and just think, well, there's a goal at the end of the day, and this is part of the or one of the hurdles I've got to jump to get there.
Most definitely, and it's a good attitude to have. It's all a learning process. You're paying your dues. I think that's very, very important in an organisation like a police force, that you understand that just learn your way, learn all the things. It might be doing point duty or the traffic accident, which is probably not what you're aspiring to, but it's all part of the learning process.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I do stress that they don't do those things anymore.
Oh, right.
That,
Okay.
I think a number of years ago they stopped doing that because it was too demeaning. So
we both had a conversation before this, and we were talking about the policing and trying to encourage police, because the bigger pool you got, the better people you can select. And it saddens me. I see across the country police forces are struggling to attract recruits, and it's okay. We better not tell them they've got to sweep the roundabout if they join.
No, not and not to not to take away how hard the job is, but it's very very satisfying, very fulfilling as well.
Yeah. What steered you towards a career in detectives?
I think I'd been here for a number of years and just did a few different roles in general duties or in regional policing, just the normal street policing. And then one of my first postings was in an area called Piranha here in Melbourne, which is pretty much next to St Kilda as well. So I worked at the support group, it was called at the time, where they did a lot of the lower level drugs investigations and other I suppose mid level crimes. I suppose that the ones that the detectives weren't doing, and so I did that for a little while. And one of the great things about those units, and still is that they're a bit of a breeding ground for new detectives. So the junior people like I was come in, but the sergeants there tend to be people who've been detectives, either been off at the crime squads, got promoted, and then they're coming into these units. So you're actually getting led by people who've got that background. So, it was a really formative time for me, I think, here, where I decided, this is what I wanted to do. And there was a few of those sergeants there that had, come from the armed robbery squad and the homicide squad, and you kind of just got a taste of, they those bigger investigations as well, I suppose. So that's where it started for me.
We're going to jump into your career in major crime and being involved and leading some of the country's biggest homicide investigations. But before we do, both former homicide detectives, I think it's important we talk about the impact homicide has and the devastating effect it has. And there's a ripple effect with a homicide, isn't it? When one life is taken, it's not just one life destroyed. There's multiple lives that are destroyed. What's your thoughts on homicide investigation in general?
Look, it doesn't get any tougher. And I think about myself, and I think about all the other people doing that work. That these cases stay with you forever. And I think ultimately, if I look at why I stepped away at the end of the day, I think it just the sum total of carrying all that from over that period of time, it's just a weight on your shoulders that you kind of just want some release from. But I mean, the reality is as an investigator in a homicide squad, in a homicide matter, I should say, those cases can take 10 years to work through the courts. And if you're the lead investigator in those, you carry those cases and other cases, so you, as you know, all your homicide investigators are carrying multiple cases. Yeah. And a lot of them can take a long time to work through the courts, and you keep that. Yeah. And this is probably one of the things, if I could actually change anything or work towards changing something, it would be to take the reliance off the individual a little bit more. And I'm talking specifically about Victoria here. I think there's too much reliance and too much pressure put on what we call the informant here in Victoria, who are all things to all people. So, they've got to prepare the case, they've got to be the liaison with the families, which is a very, very difficult very difficult role. The court liaison, prepare the matter for court, and and that goes on and on and on. If you get a matter that goes to the High Court, then you're looking, potentially 10 years down the track. And that's the one thing that I would like, some focus to be on, and just relieving some of that pressure on the individual here. But I think that's the hardest part about homicide. I don't think there's any other cases, and I've investigated pretty much everything else, where they stay with you as long as they do. And of course, it's not just stay with you in a technical sense, or it's an emotional sense too, because most of us carry a little bit, with this, and just through that, dealing with the families day to day and these matters, it attaches to you.
And when you're involved in it, I don't think you fully appreciate it until you step away from it. That's what I found anyway. When I stepped away from homicide, that you didn't realise the pressure you were carrying until you stepped away from it and had perspective. It was just something that, well, this is what I do. You talked about the pressure on the informant. I know in New South Wales, and I'm sure it's in Victoria, it's just the nature of things, and resources are limited. Quite often you'd have a big strike force investigating a particular murder, and then someone's been charged, and then, okay, well, we need to allocate the resources elsewhere. And you're left there with, you used to have a team of 20, now you've got a team of 1 or 2, and you're expected to run the matter through the courts. You said,
and you're expected to help other people with other jobs, and also take on new cases too. Invariably.
You said in the chat we had the other day that in the UK they have a system where that, what you were saying we should aspire to, they had a system in place there where there was a little bit less, or it was spread around. Once you've charged someone, there's more people available to help the matters proceed through the courts.
Yeah, so going back to 1989 when I left the UK, that there was investigation support teams, which were generally retired cops. And you've got to realise that most cops retire after 30 years in the UK.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are just 49, 50 and not ready to do nothing. So a lot of them actually finish on the Friday as a cop, and come back on the Monday as a administrative assistant or an investigative assistant, and there's not much that they can't do that the cop can do. This is basically only the arrest powers that change. So there was a lot of assistance through those areas, and looking at it practically as a detective or as a cop on the street. You'd go out, you'd make an arrest, you'd bring them back, you'd interview them, then you'd charge them, and that'd essentially be the last you'd see of it until it goes to court. There would be a whole range of other support services that would put the brief together, with liaison with the CPS as it is there, or the OPP as we call it here. You're essentially just a witness on the brief as the arresting officer. Here it's a lot different. You do, the individual does all those things, and there's a lot of conversations here in Victoria at the moment about bringing back some of the retired cops and to do some of this work. That's been spoken about for a long time. I don't think in Australia it's a priority at the political level.
Yeah.
I think the conversation is always around police numbers and around, get more police. That's sexy for politicians.
Wins the state election.
For 12 months here, So, we're in that cycle again, or we will be in that cycle again here very soon. And what never gets spoken about was, we could probably do with less police if we had more assistance, more administrative assistance, and they're not people that actually have to be sworn police, so they don't have to go off and do 3 months. And as you know, there's a body of people out there, ex-cops who would be prepared to come in, and if it was just taking statements,
Yeah.
or putting briefs together, that sort of stuff. Those are the roles where you could actually free up your investigators to actually do the stuff that you want them to do and go out and catching crooks.
Andrew, I think that's an important conversation, and it's something that we've touched on previously, and it's usually with experienced cops like yourself that, that is really a way forward. It doesn't necessarily we have to increase the police numbers, but take a bit of the pressure off the administrative stuff, not just with the criminal investigations, but the administration in terms of keeping diaries up to date and different things that really... people, I think, have a misconception that, and I'm sure you would have experienced this, you could be leading a high-profile homicide investigation and you could also be spending a day on the photocopier making sure you could photocopy, getting the brief prepared and doing stuff like that. And I often thought with the experience of experienced officers that we could have people assisting in those roles, but there seems to be a reluctance to it. But I think it's definitely worth having the conversation about.
Yeah. Well, as an example of, major cases, you're talking, and I often used to say, somewhat flippantly, when we'd made a significant arrest, the fun's over now. Then
the hard work begins.
The hard work begins and putting the brief together. And these days, it's not just putting the brief together; it's the disclosure. The disclosure in a lot of cases is greater than the brief. And through disclosure, we're talking about when, obviously, just to explain to the listeners, when the solicitors get the brief and they then put in, their disclosure requests or demands, as they are, and all the other material that they deem to be relevant or want to assist their case has to be prepared and submitted. And in a lot of cases, there's a lot of redaction and a lot of work got to go into that. And generally, it's one person doing that again. That can take longer than the brief to put together.
Oh, most definitely, and I think it's quite often, I believe, not just solely, but sometimes used strategically by defence barristers and solicitors that you get your requisitions on a Friday afternoon. And they can be extremely broad, and it would be, literally going through hundreds and hundreds, if not more, pages of evidence and redacting certain things and gathering information. So, look, it's a conversation that I think's worth having, and it's good sitting down, speaking to an experienced police officer, looking at it, stepping away, not involved in it now, but thinking where there could be improvements and just using the experience of retired police officers. That's something that I've often said about New South Wales, and I can only speak with knowledge on New South Wales. But when someone retired, they were gone from the force. And I had friends, colleagues that had retired for whatever reason, but they would love to be working 2 or 3 days a week, and it could just be as simply as sitting down taking witness statements. Just to, and there's a skill set that they've walked away with, and we're not utilising that.
And don't get me started on witness statements, because that's probably one of the if I had to talk about one of the arts of certainly being a detective is good witness statements, and they're very rarely done. And so some of the more experienced people, if that's all you're doing, because as you know, your cases revolve on your witness statements. So I'm not submitting my CV just
But
for information. But
I know what you're saying. We look at it, and I was working with strike forces, and I'm thinking I know these people are sitting home bored because they're phoning me all the time since they've left the police, and I would love them to come in and get this detailed 20-page witness statement covering off all the information that's required. But look, we're getting distracted. I was going to have the conversation about policing, but let's delve into some of the cases that you've been involved in. I'd be criticised by the audience if I didn't take you to Strike Force or Piranha, the Melbourne underworld gangland killings that certainly played out big time and in the Underbelly TV series. What was your involvement in that investigation? Tell us about what was going on at that time.
Well, I was there at the start, so I'd not long been at homicide, and I was allocated to a crew. My senior sergeant was a fellow by the name of Phil Swindells at the time, and we actually had a lot of the unsolved cases on our crew, which had happened. So unsolved shooting murders out in the western suburbs of Melbourne. And that it was actually Phil who put together a report recommending a task force be set up to investigate all of these unsolved murders, because there was some commonality in some of the identities that were cropping up. And of course, now people like Carl Williams and these were the people whose names were sort of coming up. And as you know, both from as a trooper and then as a boss, task forces, you don't want to set one up unless you absolutely have to. So there was some resistance at the early stages. So that was knocked back, that request initially, and then there was a fellow by the name of Nick Radev, who was notoriously known as Nick the Russian, which I could never understand because he was actually Bulgarian. But Nick the Russian was killed or shot and killed in Melbourne, in an area of Melbourne called Coburg. And that was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back. So when that happened, it happened in a very public place, and there was, rightfully, there was a lot of media outrage about that.
Yeah.
And so that was the start of Piranha. So it was really, for any of you listeners and yourself, if you've watched The Wire, when, it's a bit like setting up the task force in The Wire, that you go down to the basement with the old, the fax machine and the computers that don't work with the old software on them, and we didn't quite have the walking wounded that they had in the Wire, but again, I've always found the startup of task forces or strike forces something, it's funny, and it's got its own culture and itself in policing, I think.
Well, you've opened up my mind about some of the strike forces that were started up, and that'd be announced by the senior police that we've got a strike force, and then you look around and we're still sitting at the same desk. I don't know.
No cars, no computers.
No computers. Well, what about staff? Oh, we should be able to get you some staff, and invariably you get someone that's on long-term sick leave or on holidays.
He's coming back in 6 months, but you can have him.
Well, it has twigged my memory on those times, and that it was chaotic, and I would explain to people, and the more experience I got, and I was taught by people that were experienced, I couldn't understand when we're starting the strike force, when I was a young, fresh detective, all excited, why we're worrying so much about where are we going to access a whiteboard? Why are we worried about computers? Shouldn't we be locking up the bad guys? But I came to learn that was imperative for the success of an investigation, to make sure you fought for everything you could to get your strike force set up properly.
Whiteboards were a serious commodity, weren't they, in policing back in the 80s? And but I do say that Piranha was different in that. So our entire crew went up to this task force, and then they brought in some other people and some great people as well from different areas, from drugs and stolen cars, and so that was the start of it. And then it multiplied significantly after the murder of Jason Moran and a fellow by the name of Pasquale Barbero.
Yeah, high profile.
Out at the Cross Keys Hotel in Pascoe Vale, and this was the one that happened on an Auskick, so an AFL Auskick morning. All the kids there playing footy, and the two deceased in that matter actually loaded their kids into a van, and were just about to leave from memory when they were brutally assassinated, and in public view with all these kids at this junior footy morning. And that was the one that just caused enormous outrage. And as I've said before, I think there are a number of things that are sacrosanct in Australian society, and kids sport on the weekends is one of them. And for something like that to happen in that environment, so then there was a big injection of staff into the task force. As a result of that, we probably tripled in number. Went to a bigger room.
Yep.
Got a couple more cars, a couple more whiteboards.
Yep.
But that's when it really took off.
What was the pressure like then? Because I know when you're involved in big strike forces like that, it's 24/7. Like, for each action, there's a reaction. You're targeting people. You're keeping an eye that further crimes, and it's a little bit different from some homicide investigations because you've almost got to be proactive in the way that you're trying to prevent further crimes happening.
It was like, who's next? So we all were allocated an investigation, and then there's homicides that are happening, and you're looking at those and seeing if there's any connections into it. And then if there are connections, then there was a bit of a negotiation with the homicide squad to release those investigations to the task force. So it was that was crazy days really. That you kind of just every day you were just kind of wondering who's next. And I think that's the crooks almost got intoxicated on what they thought was this power that they had to do this, and so that's why I'm really proud of the work that we did, and I often get asked about this. There's obviously been some issues over the years where some of the tactics that we use there have certainly been questioned, but holistically, from my point of view, it stopped what was happening and undoubtedly saved lives, and stopped this where the underworld were actually trying to run the city.
Yeah, that is the difficulty of situations like that. Like, I'm sure the task force was set up to solve the crimes, but also prevent further crimes from happening. And there's a lot of pressure, and you've got to think outside the square in those ways. I think what we're alluding to, and we don't have to delve into it, was the solicitor that became an informant that's been playing out publicly over the past few years from it. I look at it from an investigator's point of view, and I can just picture how chaotic that whole time would have been down there, and the pressures that were on and the people involved. And it's you got big personalities in the investigations like this, and you're getting pulled from pillar to post. Did you have a specific role? Were you allocated a specific role in the strike force, in the task force?
Yeah, well, I was one of the lead investigators. There was a murder that happened after the task force had started.
Yeah.
A fellow by the name of Lewis Kane, who was shot and killed out at Carlton, and then his body was dumped in Brunswick. And there was two very well known criminal identities who I can't name because of active suppression orders still. That were ultimately charged with that. So I was the informant in that case, and carried that one through, over a period of time. But so I was, one of the homicide investigators who, as I say, we generally had an active job, and we had other unsolved jobs as well that we were looking at.
Without giving away methodology on how they were caught, but a lot of them have gone through the courts. Where were the things that were breakthroughs in that whole? Where did you think that the police were starting to get the upper hand on what was going on?
It was probably the most significant investigation, in terms of the volume of electronic surveillance that was carried out over a period of time, and again, without sort of digging into the depths of that, as that's pretty complicated stuff. It's not stuff you get. It's hard to get. It's a very high bar in justification, and then actually managing that stuff. And when you talk about the volume of electronic material that we were dealing with, some of the people behind the scenes who never got the accolades should be held up high, because as you know, managing that kind of information and going through it and listening to it 24/7 is highly challenging. So that was one of the big things. Another one was the ability of some of our people, and again, just coming back to talking to people, and even some of these the people that we were talking to were the hardest criminals in this country. But at the end of the day, a lot of them you can actually have a conversation with.
Yeah, again, that communication.
Yeah, if you actually just give people respect and give them a bit of time, and I'm not saying all of them, as you know, there's some that you wouldn't waste your time on. But some of these people are actually you can have a conversation with, and there's kind of like a mutual respect. So one of the really important things that happened during that time was that they actually recruited some people and came on board and actually gave evidence against their associates. So that was a really important part of it as well, and I think that came from the quality of a lot of the investigators that we had in the team who had those abilities to actually communicate with some pretty serious crooks. At the end of the day.
I don't think you can underestimate that ability for people to be able to communicate and cultivate relationships with people to get information. And we're talking criminal informants here, but there's some people that have, from law enforcement, have a natural aptitude for it. And it can make a world of difference in investigations of that nature.
Yeah. And it used to be, I think it is a bit of a dying art, but, there was the good and the bad of back in the olden days, when I talk about the olden days in the 80s, where you did actually get out on the town a little bit more and talk to people, and that's gone now, and for some reasons that's a good thing. And for other reasons it's not a great thing. But again, I think that's just one of the challenges of modern policing, is how you kind of bridge that gap. Yeah. Where in teaching our younger people how to actually communicate with people on the other side of the tracks. Yeah. Because a lot of them don't do very well.
No, they don't. And we had that was identified as a problem in the Royal Commission we had up here in New South Wales, the police and informant relationships and all that. But in my time involved post Royal Commission, we're very accountable in the communications that we had with criminal informants. We had to document it, and it was painful. Like virtually every time you're speaking to them, documenting it and all that. It was painful at the time, but what I see down the track when it came through the courts, it was great. The barristers are thinking, okay, what's gone on here? Something shonky gone on here, and you produce all the records. This is every time I've spoken to the informant. This is what the informant told me, and moving on from there. With the what we know as the Melbourne Gangland War, how long did that go on for?
Well, it had started well before Piranha started, so it would have started in the early 2000s, and probably for at least five years after that, I would think it would be at least 5 years, and then obviously you talk about how long things take to work through the courts, but I would say certainly there was 5 years of
okay. It. With Piranha, the task force that was set up, how many police were attached to that at its highest?
Well, I would say we started off with, from memory, about 10 or 12 in the very early days, and then it went up to about 60 or 70, I think.
Right.
So it was, and that's a sizable task force, as you know, in Australian terms. It would have been, up around those numbers.
Yeah, that's big numbers. When it ended, can you put a point on when the war ended? as we describe as a war. And how many people were killed or got attributed in that conflict? Was it?
Look, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
I can't recall from memory, but pretty much everyone either ended up dead or locked up.
Yeah.
One or the other. And certainly in the case of Carl Williams, he was locked up and then he ended up dead.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much, it was actually the fact that we locked all the players up at the end of the day, or they'd either already been killed.
They'd been killed or been locked up, and that probably put an end to it. It was a fascinating job, and it certainly captured the attention of the nation with the Underbelly, the first Underbelly series that played out in it. Was that up and running at the time of the investigations, or that came after the investigations?
Well, it actually came after the investigations, but they started filming that, and I was again privileged to be part of that.
Yep.
And actually was given permission within Victoria Police to actually act as the technical advisor to that show, which was really interesting and wouldn't happen now, but different times but. That's where I got to know a lot of people in that, in the
field.
In the film and television industry, I suppose, because a lot of the the top people in Australian film and television worked behind that, as you know, because I know you were involved in it, and so that was really interesting experience to be there from the start with Underbelly, and to work with the writers and the producers from the start of that. I remember one of the greatest takeaways I had from that is a thing that I maintain today is that truth is stranger than fiction. I remember sitting in writers' rooms with some of the best writers in Australian television. And seeing their jaws hit the table when we were telling them stories about things that had happened. And these are ultimately things that made it into the television show. And they were, saying, "Oh, we couldn't make this up. Like we couldn't write this." And that's one thing that's actually stuck with me. There's a lot of things that we see and that we're exposed to that you couldn't make up. So that was really insightful for me, thinking that a lot of what we do see is actually stranger than fiction. People couldn't make it up.
It's interesting, and I think you got permission to consult with the Underbelly when they did the series on Underbelly badness on the Terry Falconer murder. Senior police approached me and said, "Look, Underbelly writers are doing this. We're happy for them to sit down, speak with you, and all that." So I had permission also to provide information to them. Sadly, about 3 weeks before it was due to go on, they've cancelled that permission, and I've said, "Well, I've already given all the details. They've followed me round at your direction, and now you're telling me not to speak to them." But my experience with it, I know in speaking to you, and I got to the point where I said, "Look, to the Underbelly writers, you can't be round while we're working. Step away from it, and I'll give you my time after work." And they would often say, "Well, we're taking up so much of your time." I said, "That's fine." And the thing that helped me get through that was working with creative people. I found it refreshing, because police is so dark, heavy, and you're stuck in this world. And then you sat down with the writers and spending time in the writers' room, as you described. I found it quite refreshing, and it balanced out the day-to-day police work.
I still am in awe of some of those people, some of those writers, and I have the sort of privilege of working with some of them still today. And one I'll give a shout out to, I know he's a mate of yours, Greg Hadrick. He's a good friend of ours, and Greg was one of the main guys, and his ability to absorb information and then to convert that into a script or a story, overnight. It still leaves me in awe of his skill. And and Greg was one of a number of writers, and they were all good. And a lot of them had come out of that Neighbours and Home and Away kind of environment where it's a constant churn. And I think that was kind of where a lot of those writers cut their teeth as well, talking about where we cut our teeth, just on that constant churn of...
The constant pressure. I was surprised at the depth and the team that Greg had, and I would quite often joke with them that they delve so deeply. I said, I need you guys on the strike force to work as my analysts. Like they would dig up things and come back with things. But look, it's an interesting experience, and it's good sitting down speaking to a fellow cop who has that experience, because it's something that's rather unique in the world of policing. But
well, if I could just say as well, I mean, I know you've had experience with this, but in the production phase, so when they're actually filming things, one thing that actually just I used to think, I wish I could have these people working for me, doing warrant
the
planning,
logistics,
because they're planning logistics and execution of their plans. Everything's planned down because time is money, as you know, in that industry, and the planning that goes into it, the communications, the logistics is just first rate. So big shout out to that industry.
Yeah, interesting experience. We might take a break here, Andrew, and when we get back, I want to talk about a couple of other cases, and there's a whole range of cases I could talk about. But we'll talk about the rape and murder of comedian Eurydice Dixon, who was stalked in the streets of Melbourne. That was a particularly horrible case. Get your thoughts on policing, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot more to talk about when we get back.
Okay, thanks.